evening, everybody, and welcome to Mad Realm's Vote to Kick. I'm your host, Melthanis, also known as Jim, and with me is my fellow Talking Scrit host, Age. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. Just got in, a little tired, but I'm ready to have fun.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So tonight, it's kind of funny. The reason Age has been missing a lot of recent Talking Scrit and hasn't been on Vote to Kick is because of the topic for tonight is mandatory overtime in game development. I don't think
Mhm.
Age is a games designer, but he has been working that crunch time, and I've been there myself. But before we get to that discussion, in the poll right over there, we have the results from PvP tutorials night with Aaron. It is a relatively deciding vote. I think it was like 5-3 or 6-2. It's
That's pretty interesting.
people are for the people that voted. They're looking for more in-depth PvP tutorials. And if you go back and watch that video, Aaron had some pretty good ideas for how developers could lean into PvP tutorials and keep them up to date. But
Hmm.
I definitely recommend taking a look at it because there were some pretty interesting ideas. But we will go ahead and switch over to the other poll. Ha! Quick transitions. So, Age, as guest, I will let you go with opening arguments. I believe you said you were going for keep for this.
Yeah, I'll go for keep. Yeah, it's not fine. All right, so overtime in basically in development industry, from my experience at least, sometimes it is mandatory to do. But in game development, sometimes I do think it is mandatory just because of deadlines that you have in a game company. So let's bring up the obvious elephant in the room. So Red Dead Redemption have a lot of overtime. Like people have been working. What was it like?
Over 100 hours a week.
Yeah, up to that. That's really excessive. First of all, I won't say that, but we they do have to work overtime to meet their deadlines in order to put out the game because the game, if you've seen videos or have watched streams or have played it yourself, that game is very massive. It's very huge. It has a in-depth story, mechanics, all that stuff, and it is very prone to bugs in that respect. So the more elaborate or the more detailed a game is, the more time is required to actually make said game. And if you don't have like 2 3 years to make the game, you kind of have to fit in overtime. That's my opening statement.
Well, my my opening salvo here is that the longer you work people, the more likely they are to make mistakes, the more likely they are to get stressed, and the more likely they are to get sick, which leads to more mistakes, more stress, staying sick, worse work overall. I say that as someone who was working crunch on a website and I was at the office with a flu and completely misread an email from my boss about how to set up a button and had to completely recode an entire section of a website. I don't think I would have done that if I would have been healthy and rested for that.
Okay.
The other side of things is more a direct point against what you were saying, as you were alluding to deadlines. I'm starting to think that the deadlines are what's killing people in time wise, not literally killing people that I'm aware of. Is if you have to be pushing people to work 100 plus hours a day or a week, I'd say, or even 60 plus hours a week, I'd say your deadline's a little too tight. And considering the amount of money that a lot of these game companies can throw at games, I think they can chill for a little bit on the hard deadlines.
hmm Okay. In terms of health, I do agree. Being healthy is a good thing to keep in mind when assigning overtime to your employees. It's very important. I myself was like over the past 3 months, I've been working a lot, and my lead thankfully, gave us like one weekend on, one weekend off at some point because we've been working really hard at it. Um, and I think there is a fine line between overtime and excessive overtime. Like I'll agree that the Red Dead Redemption overtime was very excessive. Maybe it was required to get the game out. I don't know, but I do agree that it was required. I do think though that it's not a bad thing still. I do believe that people, if the company is taking care of you in that respect, giving you time to adequate sleep, giving you like healthy snacks to while you're working. I think little things like that does help out in that respect. In terms of deadlines, I do agree that like if you take it in terms of Guild Wars 2, for example, right? The game came out when it was ready, right? They didn't announce anything basically when it was ready. It took them 5 years? 5 years to make the game. And then when they were close to getting the game out, then they announced a release date. In terms of AAA games, that is not there. You don't have that flexibility, sadly. Upper management have unfortunately we have sales and they need to break in money. They need to get their product out as soon as possible. And at best, you have 2-3 years to make a game, unless you're like I don't know, like Square with Kingdom Hearts. So it's at some point like a deadline's going to come out. They're just going to say it, and you kind of have to follow through with that if it comes out. And if something breaks along the way, if something isn't done, isn't polished, there's really no choice because you're kind of stuck on that deadline unless something really bad comes up. There has been pushbacks, obviously, for some games, but mostly people get things done.
Oh, okay then. I think honestly that my only point in time where I'm okay with mandatory overtime is that period where you're pushing something out. Now, and I guess this is kind of contra to my previous statement of, management has to be a little more chill with the release times. Um, yes,
Mhm.
there's going to be a point in time where you're getting down to a hard release date and you have to rush it. That needs to, have a definitive hard end point, and there has to be a time for people to recharge after that.
Mhm.
When you're talking about, say, Telltale, to go a little past the Red Dead
Oh,
Redemption debacle,
okay. Yeah.
they were working crunch for over a year, and it was just rolling over and over from project to project. Crunch hours, no matter what, just crunch hours, just go, go, go. Uh, it was a death march. I mean,
It
you
was a
see,
literal death march.
I mean, you see stuff like that with it's made fun of a little bit in some anime and other stuff from Japan. They have people sleeping under their desks and
Hmm.
stuff like that, and it's just like that can't happen. It has to stop at some point, or you will literally have people keeling over at their keyboards.
Hmm.
So,
At that point, I don't think the problem is with overtime. I think it's the problem is with management not having enough people to do the job, right? Because in terms of Telltale, that's what it sounded like. They didn't have enough people to actually make all of the games. Because what was it? It was Walking Dead, Batman, and maybe another one. I think Borderlands. I think those were the last couple of games that came
mm-hmm.
out. But I don't feel like it's due to overtime, whether it's just poor management in terms of getting enough people to actually fulfill the project's needs. Like in our case for overtime, like I did overtime, but we also pulled devs from other teams. We pulled front end and back end from other teams in order to help out with the project, and it was enough. We were past our deadline, but it still got the project out before the end of the year, which is pretty good.
um, AFK Queen, BioWare rushes things when EA tells them to, which knowing what we know now about, say, Andromeda, where they forced the BioWare Andromeda team to, or they forced the ME Andromeda team to switch to a completely new engine to basically shoehorn an RPG game into a shooter engine. Thank you, dear. She made cinnamon rolls, so I have dessert for the night. Um, and it's just, there are companies that don't rush things, but
Hmm.
at the same time, it's like when the people giving them the money says go, that depends on how well you can sell your product to it. It doesn't matter if they think they're not getting a return on investment, which at this point is hitting critical mass when something like a game like what is it, the latest Call of Duty sells 5 million units in its first week. Something like it made like no, it made something like 500 million in its first week, and it's just like that's disappointing. Uh,
Yeah.
um, the first game in the Tomb Raider reboot series was disappointing according to Square Enix, even though it made back double its development cost.
Hmm.
So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you can sell things to your investors, but if they're seeing if they're not seeing their profit margin grow, they're not going to believe you, and you can only do that so much on feeling. Um, and the thing with Deo, how many times have we actually achieved mandatory overtime? It's all mandatory because in the development business there are more people than jobs. And this isn't just for games development. This is computer development in a general sense. If I was just in website development, if I had said I only signed a contract to work 40 hours a week, I'm not getting any benefit for this overtime, I'm only working 40 hours a week, I would have been let go. And they would have found someone else who would have worked themselves into a flu and still kept working regardless.
Um, I do have a question. Since you live in the U.S., I live in Canada. How does overtime work generally in the U.S. when it comes to development? Do you know?
Um, I think it depends on the honestly, the contract I signed, it was just you get a salary and it's for 40 hours a week technically. There
Okay.
was no overtime clause. A lot of people like to emulate California with Silicon Valley, where development work is here's your money, do the work that we tell you to do, regardless of how many hours it takes. Uh,
It does happen there.
yeah. Like
Yeah.
a lot of development places try to mimic Silicon Valley, and that's why Silicon Valley exists the way it does, is because development work is just here's the money, do the work. It doesn't matter how long
Mhm.
it takes, or we find someone else.
Yeah. If you look at like Windows or not Windows, Microsoft, Apple, because I know someone who recently went to Apple. They actually, they have a more easygoing time. It's interesting too because the products they put out, they're fairly decent, right? They and For example, Windows 10, there's a lot that goes into that. It's a flagship product, so of course you're going to take your time with it, get most bugs out. Obviously, there are always bugs with when new Windows, but
Well, that and the only other thing is that the difference between the businesses there is that Microsoft has guaranteed revenue streams through Office 365 subscriptions, other services, releasing.
and
And honestly, Windows 10 is going to just become Windows. And if you want it for business, you're going to pay a subscription. I already know
uh,
that's coming down the pipeline. Um, they have the time to sit because they have a guaranteed baseline revenue that's coming in. Game companies, now that they're, dealing with microtransactions and subscription fees, and they're still working off of the model of we have to get flagship releases out every single year because, they're looking for that giant bump in profit.
mhm.
But then they also want to, have a free to play economy in a purchase game.
Yeah, so it's not. It's still again. It doesn't seem like mandatory overtime is the problem in that. I feel like that is a problem with upper management again because they want this flagship product. They want to make all the monies, right? So they're going to try to, and I feel like this is going to be a trend that we're going to see keep rising as we see companies want more and more of the money. when there's not enough to go around for
It is,
everyone.
well, it is a finite resource. So,
Yeah.
and Deo, I mean, and we're getting kind of to the point here is that it's kind of a management thing, and I know I throw around that term mandatory. I suppose I should have like double quotes around mandatory because it's never really mandatory. And like
Mhm.
Deo's saying is management's going to look to the harder worker and the person who works the hardest, who basically destroys themselves or just throws them at the job because they have nothing else to do with their lives. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, like, you've
Mhm.
got the single person who literally just has their work and then whatever their hobbies are. And if they're willing to sacrifice some of their hobby time, it's not like they have anything else to do. But you'll have people that have to keep up with that. And they have, a relationship. They might have children or pets or family that they like to spend a lot of time with. And they're going to
Mhm.
have to sacrifice quality of life to keep up with who management thinks is, the main worker. And in that
Mhm.
case, it's mandatory because you get the intangibles of your life, your peace of mind, you're spending time with your family and your hobbies and what have you, or monetary because if you have money, you don't have to worry as much about certain other things. So it's that pull from both ends that burns people out, and that's why it's mandatory because you're basically having a conflict of choice there because you
Uh,
need both things, but you're not being allowed to have both things.
mhm. Yeah, but I think a little bit of that comes with the territory. If you're going into game development and you have no idea that you're going to probably work long hours at some point, I don't think it's for you in the beginning. Uh, Keep in mind, guys, like game development is it does take a lot of hours, a lot of effort. Um, so, and yes, there are those people who may not have a lot of hobbies or just like enjoying their work and don't mind spending the extra hours doing the work. And there are also those employees that have families, have pets, and so on and so forth. But I don't think there's necessarily kind of like a struggle to keep up per se. I feel like as long as you do your work, and you do your overtime, obviously, you're fine. I think I think most overtime for game development comes when you're about to ship, right? Because that's when you realize,
Yes.
oh, we have 2 months and we have to get all this done, right? So I do agree. Again, I'm not going to say like 100 hours is crazy, but I still think overtime is necessary at some times to get a product out. And I don't think that people like if a person's working 100 hours and your mandatory is 70 and you work your 70, you're still doing your job if it's mandatory, obviously. I don't think. Wait, now I think about it.
Are you as dedicated to this project as this other person over here? I get the feeling that you're just not putting as much effort into this as you could be.
Mm,
That's the
that's
response from management because that's what I have gotten that.
You've gotten that.
Yes.
I have not gotten that.
Well,
I don't.
that could
Well,
just be the
okay.
Canadian politeness, but
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone in our team who has like we have someone who's moving and who's getting married and all that stuff, so they're planning things left and right, so they can't be there all the time.
mhm.
We have someone who unfortunately has back issues and so on and so forth. We have many different people who have many different priorities. I had my priority, honestly, was to stream and to do talking script, and I just took a break from that in order to do my work. So I guess in that respect, I am the person who's working a lot. But I don't think I've worked like till midnight a few times, but not. I try not to overdo it, obviously, because I want to come down. I want to come home, want to rest, relax, be refueled for the next day. I still do my overtime properly, and I think the problem is in I think the problem is for this argument is that not necessarily overtime is a bad thing. It's just that too much overtime is a bad thing. I think that is the main issue that you might have with it. Um, and it kind of comes in with those other types of problems, such as, oh, this person's working harder than you. Maybe you should, ramp up, or hey, I know you're sick, but we need to get this out, type of thing. So I feel like the more hours you tack on to overtime, the more those problems come to light.
Because people hit burnout and then they just can't anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it's really just coming down to management being terrible at their jobs, I think.
I wouldn't say that either.
Well,
right?
I mean, I'm talking about the excessive level of overtime. Yes, a manager can say, okay, I need X amount of extra hours from everybody. You're authorized to hit 60 hours, 70 hours a week just to get this out the door.
Okay.
And it is up to the manager to be like, okay, we've shipped. We've dealt with the first round, like the first wave of serious issues. Tone it back. Everybody can take just a chill day or a chill week. Just breathe. Don't slam through bugs. Don't slam through QA testing. We've gotten through the first initial wave. Handle things as they come in a bit slower because it's going to peter off. That's a good manager. Mm-hmm. The bad managers, the ones we hear about, the people from Red Dead Redemption, the people from Telltale, are the ones who are saying, you're working 80 hours a week. Go.
Yeah.
Those are the people that I say, go jump off a bridge. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. And I think in that respect, it's kind of like a vicious cycle, right? Because the only reason people do that is because they have deadlines, because they want to get this product out before probably X product comes out. Because if you release, let's say, you release, I don't know, some sort of RPG game, right? This is like a AAA game, RPG game comes out, and let's say it comes out in February. Like you plan to have it out this year for, let's say, October, but it comes out in February. Let's say it's a Japanese RPG game, right? Now, in February, Kingdom Hearts comes out. You're gonna compete Kingdom Hearts? Oh.
Pour one out for Battleborn.
Yeah. So there's a lot of management decisions that be made. So it's like, okay, we need this out X date because of XYZ. We may not see all of those things, right? And it sucks, right? But sometimes that's just the way the ball rolls. And again, extensions probably could be done for some projects. For example, like Kingdom Hearts, people waited years for Kingdom Hearts. People at the time, like,
if I remember correctly, Kingdom Hearts was never delayed.
Yeah. So that's because it has a history. It has that audience that really wants it, and they'll be patient and they'll wait, right, until it is close to being done. Other games or other companies don't have that luxury, right?
It depends on the backers, but at the same time, you have gigantic corporations: Activision, Blizzard, EA, Rockstar. Or wait, who's producing Rockstar? It's 2K, right? I think it's 2K backs Rockstar. I could be wrong, but whoever's backing Rockstar for producing the game, you've got these giant companies enforcing hard deadlines, like they're indie devs trying to hit deadlines to keep people on the hook. So
that is an interesting one, actually. I can't really speak for indie game development because indie game development is more...
Honestly, it's fun. Like, if you compare it to indie game development, where people are just like, I already hit the Kickstarter. I'm already on their Patreon. I'm handing them money because I want to see their stuff done. I can wait. Like, I kickstarted Battle Chasers. It was
That
two
came out.
years. It was 2 years from the end of the Kickstarter until the game actually released. A little
Mhm.
longer for me because I opted to get the Switch physical copy as opposed to Xbox or PS4. But at the same time, it's like I wish AAA companies, and in my head I can hear Jim Sterling's AAA voice. Um,
So I.
they're acting like they need to get it out now or their company's going to close its doors.
Mhm.
Like, I wish AAA companies would adopt the indie developer mindset of get it out in a state where it's good and people will be happy with it. So,
Yeah. Um, I think it's for I say for that in terms of that you want to
get that trending on Twitter, Fenris. Hashtag let age go home.
let age go home here. I'm actually at home, so there you go. In terms of AAA games and versus indie games, I feel like indie games have a little bit more leeway, honestly. It's because they don't have the they don't they're not looking to make all the monies indie games. They're looking to make money.
There, and a lot of it is also driven by they want to create something.
Mhm.
Have you played Hyperlight Drifter?
No, I've seen it.
I would 100% recommend getting that game, but
Mhm.
at the same like I was watching a documentary about the developer with Krista, and he has a congenital like a heart disease. It's going to kill him eventually, and he was wondering if he was going to get this game out before then. That's what he was worried about, whether or not
Mhm.
his creation would see its completion as opposed to what kind of money he was making. Now, I think that's kind of a extreme version of that, but I think there's less indie developers have more of a drive to finish because of creating as opposed to finish because payday.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they don't want the money because I mean there are people who go to indie dev and just that's how they're going to make their money for the rest of their life, so they kind
Yeah.
of have to make a living, but at the same time they want to create, so there's a little more drive, so it's kind of expected to see people working greater than 40 hours a week, but that's more because they have a passion for it. I'm not saying they should do something that's self-destructive about it,
Obviously, yeah.
but
So I think honestly, I think you're not really against mandatory overtime. I think you're just against the idea of management managing projects properly in order to still get the game out, still get the monies, but also keep your devs healthy and happy.
it's more a matter of mandatory overtime as a function of get the project done and then we can all go home and have a few beers and be done versus slave driving.
Yeah,
Like I'm not looking for people to like I don't want to see managers basically running their entire team into the ground over and over again to get stuff done.
yeah. So I still feel like that overtime is still necessary at times when you need to get that last bit of a project done. But I am in the camp of not driving people into the ground, obviously. So I think this really comes down to management knowing, like getting in a room with their leads, trying to understand how to plan out a project more properly in order to get the main meat of it done. And if anything comes up, hurdles, they'll have that leeway, they'll have the time to actually fix it. And if necessary, they can do the overtime to actually get it shipped out. That way, it's less hours worked overall, or it's a lot of hours worked in a shorter period amount of time so that people don't burn out.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of hit the wrapping up point for us. We've kind of come to the middle ground of managers need to know when to stop the overtime. So, and Fenris, yeah, that's kind of the thing here. Is there's kind of a middle ground But then again, we still had people who were more worried about Telltale finishing games as opposed to people losing their jobs when Telltale had its issues. So there are people who are totally okay with just constant crunch.
Yeah.
So for those of you looking to cast your vote on YouTube, keep or kick. Link to the poll is going to be in the description down below. Cast your vote and then give us a comment of why you went one way or the other. I've been your host, Malthanis. You can find me on Twitter at MalthanisMMO. You can find me here on twitch.tv/MadRealms. That's 2 A's in the Mad every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for Vote to Kick, followed by our Guild Wars 2 PvP shenanigans, 0 to Hero. You can find my friend Age on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube at Age Night Road. Also here with me on Saturdays with our co-hosts Deo and Arlie for the Talking Scrit Guild Wars 2 weekly news podcast, 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturdays. Hope to see you all there. Hope to see you all on next Wednesday for another episode of Vote to Kick. Hope you all have a fantastic evening, everybody. Have a good night.
Yeah, guys.